My name is Kat, and I'm working as a training officer in the Training Hub, scientific training officer at Training Hub. Today we're going to have a fika, and I'm going to present how to build an organizational knowledge through workplace incorporated learning activities. So let's start. So the takeaways or the learning outcomes that I'm hoping for today is that you go away from this fika knowing what organizational knowledge or organizational learning is. You can hopefully also know what a workplace incorporated learning activity looks like and some different types of activities that could build organizational knowledge. I will also show an example of a learning project, which is an organizational learning activity. And then we'll have some discussions around this. So what is organizational learning? Well, first of all, we have to determine what learning is. And there are different definitions, but one that I think that we could agree on is that it's the process of acquiring, developing, and modifying knowledge, skills, and abilities. So basically, it's the acquisition of knowledge and the building of skills and abilities by modifying the knowledge that you have. And when it comes to individual learning, it's of course something that should be valuable for the function of the individual. So if we're using Bloom's taxonomy, which is a common depiction of learning within educational science, you could look at it as if you're climbing a pyramid of knowledge. So the lowest level is the skills when you just can remember something, and then you're trying to build your skills so that at the end, hopefully, you can create something from the knowledge that you have. There's also something called mental models. It's like an internal map where we place the knowledge that we have. And you can draw anything that you learn on it. And all the new knowledge that we encounter is put into this mental model. This helps us put things in context to things that we already know. So we contextualize the information. The things that we put in our model can be bits of information, but like definitions of concepts, etc., how to use a pipette and so on. But we also relate it to the past experience that we have so that we know how to use the information. And if we're to perform a task, for example, we go to our mental model and look how to prioritize, what to do, etc. So the mental model contains everything that we need to know in order to function, basically. When we learn, it's look at as if we're expanding our mental model, and thus building new knowledge and skills and abilities necessary for our function. Now, group learning is similar to this. We are always not always, but often a part of a group when we're working, and we use our mental model to perform our function within the team. But the other people, of course, have their mental models necessarily for their function in the group. But we also have a function of the whole group, and we create a mental model around this, containing all the knowledge and necessary for the function of the team. You can think of a kitchen when everyone is working like a well-oiled machinery, one placing ornaments on the final plate, the waiter balancing plates, saying like behind, and then move seamlessly past another standing with like a hot sizzling skillet. It's even sometimes not really fair calling it a oil machinery because it's more like a dance. Imagine that someone says behind and the person thinks that they're calling out because they want to talk to something or that it's something important they need to look at behind. Then they'll move around and we create like a mayhem in the kitchen. So the group has a joint mental model saying like, what do we say when we want to make people do not turn around and be aware that someone is passing behind them? Then we say behind. So we create a mental model together as we learn about the function in the team. And we also learn about each other, of course. So organizational learning is basically when groups are the entities of an organization, and the joint mental models that all the groups has created are shared between the different groups. That we're creating like a mental model joint for the whole organization. And the processes for sharing knowledge across the organization is what creates this learning of the organization. So what's a workplace incorporated learning activity? A learning activity is basically when you expand your mental model. Looking at it at a workplace, it could be a learning activity that in some way create individual learning. It could be upskilling individual functions, that is upskilling someone's tasks. It could also build the function of a team by adding to the collective knowledge, upskilling the function of the whole group. That's providing a procedure, for example. It could also be adding to the function of the whole organization. For example, by adding a change of a process or even creating a new one. That's how we create organizational level learning. Preferably, it will be an activity that also creates a result or an outcome that provides a value for the organization in itself. We will go through some examples of this. So different types of learning activities that could provide this for an organization is, for example, journal clubs. Now, journal clubs are commonly group level activities. So you could include spreading lessons learned about the procedures to also incorporate or spread the knowledge from your group to others. But it's a very strong technique or strong activity to build at least group level learning to create a joint mental model for the group. Another way to create joint mental models for a group and also amongst or over groups is, for example, creating a joint document that you co-create, and you have these little comment boxes on it. So commenting on joint documents also provides like an insight to other people's mental models. You can also do this by adding commenting to, for example, a scientific article. You could also even create discussions next to it, so that you discuss different things, and you can talk about what do they mean here, how have you implemented this over at your place, etc. And this is something that we often do on articles and reports. And in some way, you could look at white papers and other articles where organizations go out and say, this is our view upon something, as a social annotation. Although it's not digital, it's still a way of spreading the reflections from your organization to other organizations. There's also a method when you can build a digital discussion board. In a sense, Slack is a way of social annotation, especially if we spread things that we've learned at an individual or group level. We will automatically build on the group level of other groups or the organization learning. Now, another technique is lessons learned. It's basically collectively defining the takeaways from different projects that you have endured or endeavored. This is very common at a group level, but you can also spread it to an organizational level, spreading the takeaways from different projects to other groups. There are even organizations who have full-time employed people who are just working with collecting all the lessons that has been learned in different projects, making sure that hopefully you do not repeat the same mistakes as the group next to you or the group in another part of the organization. In a way, our facility forum at SciLifeLab is also a way to create organizational learning. It's bringing groups together in ways where we do not only learn individually, but also expand our group's mental models and the mental model of the organization. It's an effective way to build the culture, but also to build the mental model that includes also processes, etc. So what is a learning project? Well, there was an article about this that it was very interesting, and I thought that I wanted to share the way that they've looked on learning projects. Project-based learning or problem-based learning is similar or common in education, but it can also be applied in a workplace setting. This specific article is based on something called a learning network theory, which is basically, when it came up in the 90s, was a new way of looking upon learning, as looking at it not individually, but as a group or organizational learning, but also looking at the format, looking at learning as not something that just occurs in the individual's head, but also in a group settings and also practical. So a combination of different things. The authors then defined a set of rules that they want to a learning project to attend to be able to be called a learning project. The different steps was that one parameter was that they were supposed to be learning together as a group. And they also needed to be aware of that they were learning. They wanted it to be multifaceted learning, and they wanted it to be clearly linked to something that would improve the work. So one of the examples in the article was a group of consultants. There were 5 consultants within organizational management, and they had all different opinions on what was best practice. So their mission was to improve the skills of the whole group or the whole organization. And they decided to do that by attending a course. So they found a course that was set up for 7 contact days during a period of 9 months. They collectively prepared. It was a course with a combination of theory and practice. So it was a lot of individual learning through reading, but it was also practical hands-on cases with applications during these 9 months. They decided to do a collective preparation, mostly in group, but of course some learning on individual level. But they had the preparation so that they had constant reoccurring discussions together as a team from their organization. During the course, they also met other participating groups, so they could contribute and also get knowledge from other groups' mental model. Apart from this, they also created their own initiative. The thought with the course was to implement what they've learned on real-life settings, but they decided to not just take everything and implement it. They decided to split the group of 5 up. So 2 were trying to implement the new things, and the others were standing from a distance, evaluating what happened. This made it into an iterative learning process where they implemented something, then had a discussion where they could look at it from different perspectives. This was what it felt like when we implemented it, and this is what it looks like from the outside. And they could reflect upon their learning. So the question is, did they fulfill all the requirements? Well, they, of course, were learning together. There were reoccurring group reflections where they talked about everything from what they've learned, what they've read, what they've learned during class, what others talked about, etc. And they were, of course, also aware of that they were learning because they did it iteratively and explorative. They were talking about their reflections upon their reflections of what they've learned. It was also multifaceted learning. They were reading, they were attending class, they were discussing, and they even did their own experiment. There was also a clear link between what they were doing and the work improvement. I didn't say that, but apart from developing their skills, they also realized that their mental model shared a common denominator that the other groups and teams that were attending the course did not. Well, they had a different approach than the others, and this made them create a different type of product than the other consultancy agencies that were attending the course. So they basically developed a unique product, and this was became one of their unique selling points for the organization. So my question to you now is, what would a learning project look like in a research infrastructure? I'm thinking that, for example, one could talk to users and spread the knowledge from user cases, and talk and spread the knowledge about how you work with users and interact with users on the different types of units that we have in our research infrastructure. So there's an example from the same article where it's instead was people from healthcare settings. So they had different professional backgrounds, and they went around and talked to different organizations or hospitals wards that were doing well, they were using a technique that they hadn't implemented yet. So they made a study visit and looked at how they were working to get lessons learned from that, and then took it back to the organization. They also created discussion groups when they were discussing what they've learned and what they felt about what they've seen. They too changed their process. Of course, the process of that specific treatment, they changed that part, but they also changed how they were working on the implementation and development of other processes within the organization. And when it comes to incentives, there was a problem in that project that not every profession felt that they had the time to do the reflection in groups. And I think that's something that is important to think about, that when you learn as an individual, it gives you probably a great reward, but to also learn as a group and contribute with what you learn is rewarding both for the group and for yourself, because it helps the other people or the other groups to see what you're working with and how you're prioritizing between things that you know. So adding that as an incentive, I think that it could be intrinsic, or it should be intrinsic, that you want to contribute or you want to expand your own mental model. But also showing the benefits of having a shared mental model within a group or even an organization could be a way of showing or urging, like a carrot for creating an eagerness or need or willingness to want to see what others have learned. So I think that's important to try and show the benefits of different learning activities. I think basically that if you want to change an organization and you start from top down, and you haven't created, well, if the things you're trying to create is very different from the culture that's been previously, it will create friction, and very few people like being told what to do. But if you can talk to these people individually or have a tete-a-tete and in some way help help them see that you're seeing their point of view and basically seeing their mental model, because basically you're trying to impose your mental model on them, regardless from where you work. If you're trying top down, it's the management's mental models trying to be shoved out on those that are under them in the organization. If it's bottom up, it's the same, but it's the us at the floor trying to prove to the management what we actually want to contribute or what we want to change. I think it needs to be a way of, this is just my personal beliefs. I think there need to be a willingness to see the other person's mental model. And the only way to really see that, it's very similar to a real map. It's difficult to see a map if you're standing looking at it from another perspective. You have to sit down next to that person and look at it and show that you're truly interested in that person's mental model. I think it's the same with the groups. And I think this is one of the things that happens sometimes when you work in a group or an organization where you want to show your joint mental model to other organizations, other groups, that you are not showing that you're also interested in their input. I don't know if this answers the questions, but basically, I think that there has to be an incentive to show that you're willing to look at someone else's mental model and that you're interested, so that they feel that they contribute. And this is, of course, important always. To show that you don't have the answers, you're there to learn as well. But I think that as a management or authority, you can be a förebild. This is difficult. Lead by example, by showing that you want to expand your mental model. Then you spread the culture of being not just willing to share your knowledge, but to also learn from the others. And this will probably ripple down in the organization, hopefully at least. I think that when it comes to management, it's also a matter of prioritization between learning and something that would result in economical income, basically. And it's very rare that we, in organizational theory in general, monetize, or at least put like a number, an economic value on learning, which I think is of course both positive and negative, because we don't want to learn just to become an income for the organization. We want to learn for our own value. But I think it's a pity that we do not show the value, that the monetary value that it also creates within the organization. And since we do not measure these things, it's very easy to, at the end of the day, think that maybe it didn't give that much a value. It's easy to calculate how much time it took and what it costs in salaries, but it's difficult to evaluate how much savings or how much money we save by doing this. Interested in learning more about anything of what was mentioned, could visit our training portal at training.sciliflab.se.